Since we're having a panel discussion, I'm going to invite over Sebastian to sit on the chair over there. We will be talking about museums and care, and museums as spaces of care. So Sebastian can sit there. We're going to invite Alessia in a minute, and I can ask Fiona as well to stay with us in case there's a question for her or for all of us after that. So maybe when she comes back, I will ask her to come over for the questions. Do we agree on that? Would you like to sit? I was saying, if you can, instead of taking questions now, you can sit just with us on the panel. And it's going to be more presentation of more amazing things as museums as spaces of care.
Hello.
See you.
So please sit down. Alessia Fassone is online with us from the Egyptian Museum in Turin, and Sebastian Cichocki, Chief Curator at the Modern Art Museum in Warsaw. We are having a discussion. We already heard a lot, and we will hear even more about how museums can become spaces of care, of safety, as comfort zones, as places where visitors may be hosted, literally, we'll see, and feel safe and cared for. So immediately I will go to Alessia and ask her to present what they do at the Egyptian Museum in Turin.
Okay, good morning everyone, and thank you for your kind invitation. And the Museo Egizio is very happy to present to your audience today two important projects we are dealing with. One from the city of Torino that was proposed to the Museo Egizio, so it's located inside the museum, and the second one is outside the museum in one of the most important hospitals in Torino. So the Museo Egizio became a place of care, as it was said before, for other institutions. And we hosted in 2022, so 6 months ago, a beautiful project named Cultura di Base, which means not only basic culture, but it is based on the expression basic medicine, medicina di base. That means the fundamental right of every citizen to be treated by the national health system. And just as care, culture is also a fundamental right and contributes to the well-being. As you can see here, we have 5 cultural institutions in Torino that was involved in the project itself, and in 5 cultural hubs. One is the Museo Egizio you see here, another one is the Mauto Museum of the Car, of the automobile, Polo del Novecento, which is a museum devoted to the history of Italy and Torino in particular in the 20th century. PAV is the Parco of Living Art, in which contemporary art is in dialogue with nature, and the library Primo Levi. So 5 hubs are involved by the Compagnia di San Paolo Foundation, which is a very important bank foundation in Torino, and the Foundation for Architecture based in Torino. This is the idea of putting in dialogue culture, care, and architecture, because architecture, like culture itself, is the bearer of beauty and well-being, and it contributes to care, of course, and it gives a qualitative improvement in life of people and entire community. You see here the press conference with the director of the Museo Egizio, Cristian Greco, the president of the Bank San Paolo Foundation, the president of the Association of Doctors in Torino, the counselor for the city of Torino for health, and also the directors of the other institutions involved in the project. Architecture in the Museo Egizio is something very impressive, because we are hosted in the so-called Accademia delle Scienze building, which is a mid-17th century building in the city center of Torino, in which a scientific institution is already hosted since 18th century, the Academy of the Sciences, and the Museo Egizio as well. So we live in the same building, and the building itself was a school originally, and you see here the 2 panels of Cultura di Base project. So what happened here in one of the most historical parts of the building, a medical office was located. Why medical offices? It is because to put surgery in cultural institutions such as museums, libraries, and cultural hubs was exactly representing the first treatment space, and it is the point of contact between the patient and the national health system. Our medical office is not only equipped with everything that was needed by the doctor for treatments and for receiving patients, but it was also decorated with images taken from ancient Egyptian culture in this case, because it is the medical office located in the Museo Egizio. And as you can see here, we have pictures of beautiful objects, statuettes, and amulets that were supposed by ancient Egyptians to be a mean of treatment, of health, and good luck. So we want not only to host the patients, but also medical professionals, because medical professionals themselves have been under great stress in the COVID pandemic situation, with heavy reflections on their emotional conditions and a big number of cases of burnout. So we decided exactly to put in dialogue the two realities, and this beautiful project is a multisensory experience capable to generate deep emotions and learning. The patients were invited to visit some parts of the exhibition galleries for free. So it was a way not only to bring new audiences in the Museo Egizio, but also to offer them a point of contact with care and with culture. This experiment lasted about 6 months. The results are going to be published in next month at the beginning of 2023. And in a future perspective, we wish to extend the project also to the in-house staff as well, and also to have a medical hub, first emergency room for also visitors of the museum. For the moment, the project was involving only the patients of 2 general practitioners that are normally based in the city center of Turin. The second project brings the Museo Egizio outside its walls, and it goes to the Children's Hospital Regina Margherita, which is one of the most important realities in the city, in Piedmont, and maybe in Italy too. We are cooperating in the hospital with the Fondazione Forma, which is an ONS foundation aimed to the young patients of Regina Margherita Hospital. Every year, Forma ONS organizes a very beautiful and interesting meeting, which is the meeting of Santa Clauses in front of the hospital. You see some images of the meeting that took place last weekend. The little patients are involved in a beautiful party with the participation of acrobatic superheroes climbing on the facade of the hospital, and they bring, of course, gifts and presents to the young patients. And it is also the occasion to raise funds for helping the hospital in buying the most modern diagnostic and therapeutic machinery. The project of the Museo Egizio is named Il Bello che fa bene, the beauty that does you good. And it brings the ancient Egyptian civilization to the hospital with copies, replicas of the original artifacts we preserve in the Museo Egizio. We hold there small lessons, game workshops, and hands-on activity carried out by ourselves, by the museum staff, once a month. You see some images of last year's meeting with the children of the Regina Margherita. Generally speaking, the meetings are held in the hospital library or in the games room of every single department of the hospital, and in special cases, as you see here, directly in the room of some patients, because they cannot move from there. So we try to organize activities and workshops, always connected with the age and the knowledge of the patients. So we start from very, very little kids up to teenagers who suffer of mood disorders. So we are carrying on this activity, which is still ongoing, but in the pandemic period, we decided to move all our activities online. So also the schools hosted in the hospital moved online their activities, and we did the same. So we decided to organize lessons, quizzes, games, and workshops remotely, both for individual patients and for entire hospital departments, as a sign of gratitude for the health workers and for the medical professionals involved in the COVID pandemic. We decided to organize some visits for doctors and for the families, accompanied by the curators, as many other cultural institutions in Italy did, as well as we did. So thank you very much, and I leave the stage to the other panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alessia. If you can stay with us for a while, we're going to listen to Sebastian as well, and then we can all maybe take a round of questions. I'm reminding also to our friends online that they can put their questions on the chat for us, for any of the three, for Fiona, for Sebastian, or for Alessia, or for me if you have any questions. That being said, Sebastian, please.
I would need the remote control.
You will need the remote control, of course.
I can also move here. So, I can just, I don't know. Such a pleasure to be here. It's all about like healing and care, so stretch your arms, you know, like relax. I saw some like people who are like already falling asleep, so kind of ventilate, you know. It's so we'll get like kind of adjusted to my heavy Slavic accent, and you know, it's a moment to shift. And yeah, so what I'm presenting today, using this very generous invitation, thank you so much for having me here, is actually it's not a paper. I'm not going to read anything, so wake up. You know, I will present a very dense slideshow because I'm like working with visual culture, so I'm going to share some images, and I will comment on those images, but they will be also like 3 thoughts which I wanted to share, like kind of, you know, main kind of ideas, concepts behind it. And the first thing is that museums, as a way of doing things, shouldn't be taken for granted. You know, what we are facing now is one of the options, one of the scenarios. That's the first thing. The other thing is that how you do things with those devices, museums, might be done in a different way and has been done in a different way in the 20th and the 20th century. So like this model, a model of a museum, has been like stretched, bent, you know, abused, overused. It has been like modified, questioned. So this is the thing which we should have a closer look at. And the third thing is that we are facing a really like a morbid reality nowadays, facing quite a planetary challenge, climate crisis, fossil fuel wars, new fascism wave. So it's also like a moment when we can, instead of like inventing new models, like new formats, new devices, we can look at the past. So basically, yeah, we can do things in a different way. You know, there are things which has been done in the past, and then facing our problems, we can like revive, recycle, reuse, forage maybe some elements, devices from the past. So yeah, so basically, I'm looking at those moments when things are becoming kind of absorbed by museums, absorbed by institutions, while the reality non-artistic reality becoming a part of the museum everyday life. But there is also like the other kind of way of dealing with things, when museums, while facing those troubles, facing those difficulties, becoming something else. And this is quite an incredible metamorphosis. This is quite a unique way of doing things with museums when they transform, when they being pushed so hard, then they start to morph into other kind of entities. And I guess this is very interesting moment, because we are so much used to art becoming something else. So art might be like many things. We know about it. We are not surprised to see, like all those beautiful activities which Fiona presented. It's obvious that this is art. We can do art together. We are also like very much used to those moments when exhibitions become something else. There are like many formats of exhibitions. They may be performed on a theatrical stage. They might be like used as a kind of like a publishing kind of activity. But it's much more difficult to imagine how we can stretch the whole structure of a museum as a building. There is something about like software and hardware, so to speak. Software is quite important, like the way of programming things. The hardware, it's a building. It's a building. You saw this little drawing with those fingerprints left on it. I think it's a beautiful kind of illustration of those processes when the users, not like passive spectators, passive viewers, but active. You saw a lot of beautiful images today when people like take initiatives and they kind of change the structure, like they change the system a lot. But also like museums are quite stubborn kind of creatures. So you might bend them, but they like try to get to the original shape. It's very difficult to kind of push them hard. And this is like an example from the past. When I'm talking about learning from the past, this is one of my favorite examples. I use it a lot. It's in discussions about art. 1945, the Museum of Art in Malmö in Sweden opens its doors to refugees, to former concentration camp prisoners, and becoming a refugee camp. So Ernst Fischer, the director of the museum, decides, okay, we are a civic institution, we are like a public space, and there are like some urgencies which we have to face. So mainly female former concentration camp prisoners from Ravensbrück ended up in the museum, and then they didn't only like eat there, sleep there. They were living with those artworks, and they were also like changing and kind of like transforming the use and the value of those pieces in the collection. We had those like beautiful examples today about like sharing things, like activating things, how they are like changing the status. And this is quite an incredible example of a former, no, maybe not former, but something which used to be like a holy object, which was a part of the church interior decor, and a statue of Virgin Mary, which was then musealized, ended up in a museum, being an exhibit, an object on a pedestal, being contemplated for its aesthetic values. And then in 1945, those prisoners, those former prisoners, taking it, like putting it on a pedestal and transforming the object into a holy statue again. So they are praying, worshiping the object again. So it's a flickering status of a thing. And we can also like imagine that museums might be like the same. They have like this. They can also like change. They can flicker. They can be both things. They can like triple. They can be quadruple things at the same time. So they're like images from one of the prisoners' Maya Berezovska, who was drawing while being in the concentration camp, but she also ended up in a museum, and the museum was like a perfect environment for just delivering, producing new works. So there are like many beautiful examples from the past where museums became like crazy playgrounds, like so-called like junk playgrounds, like as it happened in Moderna Museet. They also became like a place for performing, like a freedom of speech, like a liberty, as it happened in Rio de Janeiro during those so-called Sundays of creation, when people were like interacting, playing with different simple materials, like paper or like textiles, but also with their voices. An incredible collective performance, and activating the museum as a democratic platform for changing the reality. So so to kind of end up with this third notion, I'm coming back to Warsaw, to the place where I work, to the Museum of Modern Art, a museum under construction, which is using a few spaces in the city. And one of our spaces, it's a block of flats, like a typical modernist block of flats from 1970, which we are activating in a different ways. It's the office space, but before the pandemic, before this series of lockdowns, it was used by different communities. Our neighbors, it's a block of flats, so we have neighbors who are like cooking, meeting and so on. But we also have we hosted a lot of like social movements, a lot of like activists or different organizations, like including the Warsaw section of Extinction Rebellion, different like pro-choice organizations, feminist organizations, and many others. And then, after reading, writing, analyzing all those examples from the past, the war started. So all of a sudden, those strategies of bending, stretching, testing what a museum might be became our reality, but not as an art project. It became as our reality because reality entered the museum. So the real people, refugees from Ukraine, but also from the other countries, started to use the space as a place for distributing, making and distributing sandwiches, thousands of sandwiches every day, using it as a playground, as a safe space, but also kind of like a logistics center. So you have to imagine that Warsaw's population increased by 19% in the first weeks of the war. So every fifth person was a refugee. The situation now is getting kind of settling down, but it's still, we are facing the winter, with this terrorist, fascist invasion of Russia in Ukraine. We are facing other problems. We see how those things are interconnected globally, how it's connected with also with countries on the other continents. So the place became kind of a safe, a sanctuary. We've been reading about it a lot. Can be a museum a sanctuary in a very legal sense, a place, a safe place for those who are running away from somewhere, this kind of Middle Ages law, which helps people who can kind of find a better, safe place. But it also was a moment of testing what art might do when it's kind of released from this 19th century capture of a museum as a way of doing things, as a way of organizing things, but also as a way of controlling things. So to kind of conclude, it's I guess this is one of my favorite examples of doing things with art, an initiative of photographers, of a group of artist photographers who were delivering this service in the museum, knowing that those refugees would need tax identification number, they have to like apply for it, so they need a set of free photos. Those like analog paper photos, which is not like an easy thing to do. You know, it's pricey, there are not so many studios where you can like get such a service, and especially when you're like coming to a new place, you have to like maneuver, you have to like track down those places, you have to queue up for hours and so on. So you have those like professional photographers, like artists, like art workers who are like delivering it in the museum, like using their skills, using their competences. Yeah, so just like a few more images to kind of like transfer the spirit of the place, which is called the sunflower. The sunflower is the national, kind of like a symbol of Ukraine, to end up with this Easter ceremony, which wasn't really like an art thing. It was just an Easter ceremony, so it was like a gathering with cooking, sharing dishes. So sometimes the efficient model of an art institution kind of requires of getting rid of this costume, of this camouflage, you know, like of being like separated from life, being something else. Sometimes it's all about like, you know, it's like this trick of you know, a friend of mine, a Canadian theorist, Stephen Wright, called it like the science of escapology. You know, like it's like being like this magician who is like, you know, like wrapped with chains and so on, and then you are like escaping from this deadly trap, but then sometimes you are like losing your clothes with the chain, so you're like naked, and you cannot be recognized. So it's like a kind of like a, you know, illustration for those processes when like the museum is trying to escape, losing all the features, you know, all those like protocols, you know, which help us to recognize it as art, as an art institution, but then we are running away and we're like safe and alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. I'll hold this thought and translate it into a question, actually, and it's more of an existential question for anybody working in the museum. Now that we've seen all the amazing things that Fiona presented, and Alessia and Sebastian, we see and understand that there's a transformation in the identity and in the function of a museum. Hence, even the debate on the definition and whether it should be like that, is it a community center, and all this discussion. I'm thinking some such transformations from the traditional are the result of a crisis, are urgent. Like, I remember the Benaki Museum, even during the Second World War, worked as a safe space. People brought in their objects because Athens was bombarded, so they kept the objects safe. But this was momentary, it was for the time, and then kind of we went back to this function that you were discussing. To what degree is this transformation one way and extrovert? Do you know what I mean from your experience with your work? And I say this because I see in all of your work, and that could be another question, that you don't necessarily need anymore to relate your activity to your collections at all, in a sense. Or do you? You do?
Mm-hmm. That's going to be the subject of my masterclass tomorrow. So we're changing how we approach our collections, but we are now co-commissioning with art communities to bring new works and new representations into our collections, and working with our communities to understand the historic collections from their perspectives and communicating that out so that all audiences can participate in the multitude of meanings that exist within any artwork. So I think there's actually, for all museums, we know that as a responsibility now, and it's happening maybe in a most visible way around gender, but it needs to happen in a multiple set of ways. But I think just to go back to your question about crisis and response, I think those of us working in the museum field, you know, have always felt very keenly the responsibility of being a civic space. particularly, over the last century with the collapse of other civic spaces where people could congregate and gather. And I don't think just because I'm from a predominantly Christian country, and, certainly the collapse of the Catholic Church in a very real way in Ireland has meant that people are looking for different places to come together as a community to explore what it means beyond their tribe, but as a nation, what it means to be together. But I think that COVID, both simultaneously kind of pushed us back into our domestic spaces, but left us yearning for those civic spaces and what they might mean. And that, as we've seen, building on the kind of discussion around care and well-being today and the balance that our work can bring, is also about the kind of political impact that Sebastian was speaking about in his work, and that role, and the value that's placed on that role. And maybe I'm being cynical, I don't know if it's going to be as easy to leverage funds for our political work as much as it is for our health and well-being work, but we have always been very deft at moving money to the best, I suppose, outcome for our broader community. So, sorry, that's a very meandering answer to...
Sebastian, any thoughts?
Yeah, I can also empathize with this Christian corner. So it's all about committing sins. It's our kind of system, which is which very much reminds me of a kind of a religious kind of way of organizing, things and beliefs and ethics. It's kind of with this kind of figure which we worship, with our sanctuaries, with our saints and so on. But there is something also about those sins which we commit, as art workers, as people who kind of keep this system alive. It's about overproduction. It's about this kind of it's about competition. It's about this kind of eccentricity, of the art world, which is kind of isolating itself from the reality. And even thinking about the collection, as you say, I don't see it like a separate thing. I don't feel that taking care of those dead, nude objects is so far away from opening up the institutions to social movements, because I totally believe, I'm a believer, I'm not a Christian, but and I have a total allergy to Christianity, but I believe in the kind of a social and political impact of that things, those art objects, they are pretty much charged, and I speaking about Ireland, there was this incredible moment, this kind of, it's it was almost humorous in a very dark way when Annie Fletcher, the director of Irish Museum of Modern Art, was approached by the City Council in the first weeks of the pandemic. And so the building, which is a former military kind of hospital, was enlisted as a potential mortuary during the pandemic. Yeah, it's a great idea. Yeah, it's it's isolated by this a green belt from the city center. It's a clinical white cube. It's it's I know it's a maybe it's a kind of insider's jokes. It's kind of funny to me, but it kind of resonates with this kind of 1970s institutional critique, when people were thinking, oh, museums, they're those dead places, they're mausoleums, and they're just putting those objects on a dissection table, and they kind of cut it and analyze it, but there's no life, so it's the deadliest place on the planet, a museum, when you read those old texts by Robert Smithson and all those, guys who were criticizing the museum. But for me, it's it's I heard a lot of beautiful things today about the this kind of almost animistic kind of approach to things we collect and take care of, but it doesn't have to be. The only thing is we have to really think deeply, it's if a museum is like the most ideal, like a habitat, like an ecosystem for artworks. You know, and when I saw like those images of you know, like, you know, those beautiful pieces like being exhibited in like, you know, in a hospital, you know, like in those, you know, other places, you know, yeah, you know, our storage rooms are like full, you know, so, you know, think about like MoMA, all those like big museums, they're like millions of objects, you know, like, which you cannot even like exhibit because there's far too many. And so maybe they should be just shared with our other civic institutions, you know, like maybe they should be like activated in kindergartens and I don't know, like police stations maybe.
Yeah. Well, this
like
could be one way.
Down a little.
But also, I guess, I mean, yeah, as we're becoming more people-centered, and you just need, often you just need, as Brenda was saying, one object to tell a very long story. You don't need too much. So, yeah. Alessia, do you have any thoughts to share? Can you hear us?
Yes, I heard all your presentations, so thank you very much for this variety of topics. That was so interesting, and it is like a mosaic of realities. What the Museo Egizio can add is exactly the material culture, not only pieces of art, so artworks, that people can enjoy for aesthetic purposes or only to have a relief from pain, from illness, or from psychological diseases, but material culture is used by the Museo Egizio to express an idea of ancient Egyptian civilization as a civilization of people, living people, people who had to work, to live, to cook, and who share the same feelings we have today. Thus, we used exactly the material culture to invite the communities, mostly the Arab-speaking communities living in Torino. We have a very ancient Egyptian community here, established in Torino since the 1970s, more or less, and they were invited to visit the collection and to express what the collection of the Museo Egizio was inspiring to them. And they connected our cultural heritage that we perceive like archaeological cultural heritage as a common cultural heritage belonging to everybody, to everyone. So, starting from daily use objects, they could connect their own lives and create new narratives. What is interesting, so we are working since 2015 with Arab-speaking communities from Northern Africa or Middle East, especially women, migrant women who are invited to explore the community and to be the ambassadors of the Museo Egizio to their communities. So we created a little group of women, of guides, let's say special guides, speaking Arabic, French, English, and Italian very well. And they are involving little by little their families, their relatives, their communities to come to the Museo Egizio, not only as a place of culture, but as a place of meeting in which to share experiences, to share a moment of leisure, a moment of pleasant time, and this is the aim we want to develop in next year, so to be visitor-centered and not, as it was before, object-centered. So we already started an evolution in the perception of museums in Italy as places of where only scholars could understand what was going on. But we are moving to the idea of a museum in which everyone can contribute with impressions, feelings, and narratives. So maybe it is also a restitution to the community. So this is the idea I would like to express today and to share with you. If you agree with this perspective, or if any other idea can be suggested, it would be very useful to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alessia. I'm afraid I will have to close the discussion. I'm being warned that we're very late. Fiona and Sebastian will be here with us throughout the day if you want to have any questions to them. So thank you very much. We're just warming up the discussion.